So, you can hear well, right? Yeah, everything fine. Thank you so much. So I leave it to you, and if we'll have other colleagues who will join, I will give accept. So, thank you.
Perfect. Welcome, everyone. Welcome. Can you hear me okay? That's good. I can see you. You can see me as well. Welcome. It's so nice to see you all agreeing to take part into this webinar. And I can see there, is that the Spanish t-shirt there in red? It looks like that, isn't it? It looks like the Spanish national team, football or whatever sport you want to think about. Is it a sport-related t-shirt? It is. Okay, perfect. It's nice to meet you. I know I've seen some of you before. For the ones that I'm meeting for the first time, again, it's very, very nice to meet you. As Christina was saying, this is part of the project called Keeping Children Safe in Sports and Recreational Settings. And that's why for the next hour or so, what I would like us to do is to think about this thematic together, to try and think, what is it that we have? What is it that we don't have? And what is it that we all need and can do to actually make sure that all the children are safe and well in sport, through sport, and around sport. Now, we called this webinar, we called it the fourth game. Why? Because we already had 3 previous webinars, some of them in English, some of them in Romanian as well. And also what I would like us to do today, or the mindset that I would like us to have today, is to actually think about it as up to and go for. And I'm just going to share my screen here to see exactly what I'm talking about. Just give me 1 second. Okay. So practically we said up to and go for. Why? Because all of us, we can do something to keep children safe. It stays within our power, especially the ones that work directly with children, or if you're involved in organizational work, for example, like Terre des Hommes. It's one of the most well-known humanitarian organizations in the world. If you're involved there, you can also trigger, you can do something together with the clubs, with the settings, with all the people that actually have sports activities as part of their agenda. Now, that's why I said, let's be up to and let's go for it. I'm just going to make my screen larger now, just to show you the agenda for this webinar. Now, we know I would love for us to be face-to-face, to have a dialogue, to have a debate, to tackle each other sometimes, like we say in football, for example. Why? Because we know that the best way to keep children safe is what? Is if we're being curious, and also if we have debates about it, because we all have different experiences. My background is social work, or I've been a social worker for 20 years now, and I also have 2 children. I also played sports as a child. I used to be the goalkeeper in my local team back in Romania. So I would like us to look at the journey for all of us. I would like us to also talk about, I call this the journey of achievements. Why? Just for the ones that are new into this type of webinars, just to have a look at what has happened so far. What did we do so far? And where are we right now? Now, when we talk about the safety of children in sport, it's not a new topic. I'm sure if I was to ask you, have you seen anything in the news? Have you seen anything in the local or international news? Some of us might be able to remember some incidents or some events. And we know that usually when we hear things in the news, it's not good. It's something bad. It's a situation when we can see that a child was abused, a child was neglected, a child suffered. So those are the situations that we can see usually in the news. Now, thinking about the journey of child safeguarding in sport, some countries like England, for example, they started this journey back about 21 years ago. Germany back 11 years ago. Some other countries are new to this. And I'm thinking here about what Terre des Hommes has done so far. Terre des Hommes in 2018 has become the key and the unique child protection partner of UEFA into promoting safety and well-being in sport. So what happened there? We started working with the international forums to try and create policies and to create documentation and procedures which will be implemented or has already started to be implemented to affect that positive change into sport. Now, the other thing that we'll be talking about today is the policy, the Keeping Children Safe in Sports policy. And I would like to do a brief presentation of that. But also, as I do that, can I ask you, probably do like me, for example, I always have pen and paper next to me, please write down some thoughts and reflections. And at the end of it, at the end of this webinar, probably for about 5 or 10 minutes, we will look at those questions. So we'll invite you to write it to us, and then we can answer the questions one by one. And I would really like, if you have any difficult questions, why do you say that, Paul? How did it work? What is the experience behind saying something or doing something when we implement the policy on keeping children safe in sport? And then the next thing would be to think about the next steps. Where do we go from here? What would we like to see us from Terre des Hommes, for example? And what is the next step for all of us, wherever we are in Europe or in the world, and whatever sport or recreational setting we represent? What are the next steps for me to make sure that I do whatever I can do to be able to say hand on heart, the children that come at my club, at my summer camp are safer because we are doing that right thing. Then, of course, at the end, I mentioned we will be doing that time when we'll spend time on questions and answers. Now, do I know all the answers about safety and safeguarding in sport? Probably I don't, but what we can do together, we can see how we can contextualize this to our local area and how we can find the answers. And through our discussions, probably we'll be able to identify the child protection agencies that can help us how to answer those sorts of questions. Now, as I said, this journey is not a new one, but also we are seeing that we learn with every single day when we do something else about this topic, safety and safeguarding in sport, we learn how we can keep the children safer. Now, our project at Terre des Hommes, just to create a little bit the bigger picture here, is not just about professionals. So we have addressed this amongst professionals. We have met with coaches, with sports clubs, with sports federations, with managers or directors from the summer camp in Greece, and also we discuss with the children as well. We truly believe that it's very, very important to hear the voice of children and also to ask them, look, we thought about keeping you safe in this way. What do you say, children practicing sport or children at summer camp? Can that be okay? Is that okay for you or is it not? So we have learned from past experiences that the only way in which we can achieve these bad outcomes, and I would like to quote here my colleague Christina when she said, keeping children safe in sport is all about teamwork. Let's do that. Let's pair up with the children. Let us work together to achieve those best outcomes. Now, what I would like to show you next, and for me, I am currently based in the UK, in England, and that's why I'm very, very familiar with some of the news that I can see here. But I know these sorts of news are not just in England. I'm currently aware that in Germany, there is a massive, massive investigation with regard to sexual abuse in sport. Now, again, I'm looking at my colleague, our colleague from Spain. We know one of the most known gymnasts in Spain. So a few years ago, she also spoke about the fact that she experienced sexual abuse while she was still training, and she was a national champion in this wonderful sport, which is gymnastics. So I just want to draw our attention to something that we heard in the news on the 17th of March in England. So this is very, very new, and it said this: we know that we have done a report here, a report which looked at the period between 1985 and 2005 with regard to safeguarding in football, and we look at just at football and especially the main clubs, but also the other clubs as well. So it was a kind of overall assessment to see what have we done, what do we know we know how we can keep children safe or not when children play sport, a sport like football, which is very much one of the key sports in England, but also in many countries from Europe. So this report said this: there were significant institutional failings by the football associations, meant it did not do enough to keep children safe. So what does it mean to us? We've done something. In England, for example, we know we started having policies for a long, long time now. Now, sometimes we might also think that for every new aspect of safeguarding, we'll talk later about bullying, for example, for every single one of them in England, we have a policy which guides us how to identify it, how to tackle it. But this report says that even that, it doesn't seem to be enough. Now, why isn't it enough? It's not enough to have a system. It's because the system is actually reinforced by the people, by all of us in this webinar today. So if I have the system and do nothing about it, practically I will leave children in these situations. I will leave children in situations when they suffer abuse and neglect through around and in sport. That's why when I have the system, what will I do about it? And we'll see through the presentation today, we'll see how Tervezom created the system, created the policies, created the procedures, and our role is to get it, so be up to something and do something about it. Now, in the picture here, we can see Andy Woodward, for example. He's the one closer to us on the left side of the picture. And then we can see there other football players, we can see there Chris Answorth, the second one from the left. We can see Steve Walters is the third one, and the last one on the right, it's Gary Cliff. Now, these are the four people that back in November 2016, after Andrew Woodward, the first of them, came to the press and said about the fact that his former coach called Barry Bonnell sexually abused him. And we know that he was raped on more than 500 accounts. After that, many players who are now adults came to the press and they spoke about similar experiences happening to them. Now, sometimes we might actually ask ourselves, but why is it relevant to me? Why do I need to know about this? Why do I need to have a policy, for example? And the answer about the policy, in my view, is very simple. We need to have one because that should give all of us involved in sport or recreational settings that work directly with children. It tells all of us, what should I do? How can I recognize a type of abuse? What can I do about it? And then also it gives us the procedures, the step-by-step guidelines. How can I intervene and how can I respond? And also, how can I monitor and how am I satisfied that at the end of me doing those things, I can say hand on heart, the child or children are safer. If I cannot do that, probably we need to go and review what we've done and probably learn how we can be better at addressing these sorts of situations. Now, looking at the four men there, adult males, in the interview with Victoria Derbyshire, which happened in 2018, looking at them, only one of them actually managed to stand up to Barry Bonnell, who was the perpetrator. One of them actually told Barry Bonnell, don't come and do this to me, just walk away. He used a kind of swearing as well to send him away. But he said when that happened, what was the impact on him as a football player? He was no longer allowed to play football. He was no longer allowed to take part in the matches. And also Barry Bonnell, who was the perpetrator, also created a story that obviously our adult, who was a child then, was presented as a child that steals money and from the other college. So Barry Bonnell was very devious, and he knew how to create a story to actually get rid of the child who said who stopped him to actually abuse him. The other three, unfortunately, have been sexually abused, and you can think about whatever that means in terms of contact and non-contact. It happened to all of them. Now, to go a little bit further with regard to this topic about how does this apply to me, I just want to reflect together with all of us, to reflect about some of the questions that it might be good for us to consider. The first question is, how many of us like sport? How many of us like to play games? And probably all of us might say, actually, I like that. I like to go a little bit in the park, like I've done with my son yesterday, and just play the ball. Obviously, yesterday we played a bit of cricket as well, which is a very English-based sport. Yeah, so we did that. So we like that. Now, the other question for us to ask, how many of us have met or probably were close to a famous sports person? Now, for some of us, if you are coaches, for example, probably we had that chance. Other questions to consider. Sorry for this, I just got muted at one point. Can you hear me? Oh, yeah. Okay, you can. Okay, perfect. Now, other questions. How often do we celebrate when our children achieve something? It could be they achieve something when they do PE, physical education at school. It could be when they do something else. They just play a game in the park. We like that. But then there is also another set of questions that I would like us to consider as well. Now, how many of us, for example, when we've been to our schools or when we've been to see a sports activity, formal or non-formal, how many of us have actually been worried about the child? Now, when we say worried about the child, what do we mean? We could see that the child was probably slapped by somebody else. We could see that the coach, for example, actually guided his team to actually play the game to intimidate their adversaries. So straight away, we can see that, unfortunately, these examples, they have happened. Now, how many of us, for example, have heard or seen or heard about a child being sexually abused or all sorts of other similar experiences there? More and more, we are seeing that they happen. So these things, our responses to this question, they seem to be far more common than we would like them to be. For me, as a social worker, for example, for the past 20 years, but also as a father for the past 13 years, for me, whenever I hear that a child suffered in, around, and through sport, they were abused, neglected, or something impacted on them, and they felt hurt, straight away for me, that is one child too many. So that's why all of us, we have a duty, we have a responsibility, and all of us, we should do something to prevent and to stop these sorts of things whenever we hear about them. Now, we also know another true fact from the report that we've seen on the previous slide, the one in England. It said this: Andrew Woodward, in November 2016, he talked about the fact that he was sexually abused by Barry Bonnell, his former coach. Now, what we've seen after that in January 2017, we've seen that the main football clubs in London, and this was again in the news, they said that they knew, they were aware of such allegations, but because the local authority have not asked them any questions, they have done nothing about it. I think for all of us in this call in 2021, in March 2021, we cannot just turn a blind eye. It's our common sense, our human being response should be, if a child is hurt, if something bad happened to a child in, around, and through sport, what can I do? We need to do something. The least that we need to do is, if we know the child, actually to sit down with the child, to ascertain the voice of the child, and we'll see what that means in a few moments when we talk about the policy. And after that, to do the right thing. The right thing is to make sure that I talk to somebody who can help me to put all the safety measures in place, or as we call them at Terre des Hommes, we call them the responsive actions. So we respond in the right place to make sure that that child is safe and that child is no longer in a situation of feeling abused. Now, why do we need to do that? Because, for example, we know this. If a child experiences physical abuse, so let's say a coach or somebody from a team slaps them or hits them or beats them up sometimes. I remember having many discussions with some Romanian football players who reached all the way the top levels of their performance in the country, but also abroad. And some of them said, if we did not perform as expected, sometimes some of us were beaten up by the coaches. I don't want to go into names, and we're not going to do that. It's not our purpose today, but this has happened. Unfortunately, it has happened. So that's why when you think about these sorts of situations, let's say physical abuse, we know that if a child experiences physical abuse and we as professionals don't do the right thing to stop the abuse there and then, that child will return in the same environment. And because they dared to talk to any of us, they will experience more physical abuse, which is not right. That's why we need to stop it. Another interesting statistics, for example, in the UK and also in Romania, we have, for example, the child's line or the green line, which is a safe space for children to call and talk about being abused. Over 1 year, over 12 months in England, there are more than 750,000 children who talk about experiencing sexual abuse. Now, when we ask those children, have you spoken to anyone else about it? About more than 500,000 say this: no, we haven't. So that's why when we have the chance to identify something, I think we need to take it as a first priority and to respond to those circumstances by doing what? Being curious, asking the child, please tell me in your own words what has happened there. Now, I am mindful, I talk just about the, let's say, the extreme cases, but also throughout this, when we look at the policy, we'll see how it could be something small, but if it's something small and we don't address it, the children actually might suffer as well. So please, take a look at those questions that you put on the notepad next to you, and we'll come back to them when we look at some questions in the final part of this webinar. Now, this is the front paper or the front sheet or the cover of the general child safeguarding policy that we put together at Terre des Hommes. Now, what we know, for example, is that this document is in the final stages of being completed. We worked so hard for the last almost 2 years about it, so it's a lot of hard work there. What I think is very, very good about it, and I would like to invite you to read it and to discover this as well, is the fact that we've put it together not just as theorists. It's theorists that met practitioners. And when we say practitioners, what do we mean? Back in August, September last year, we had in Bucharest, we had a TOT, training of trainers, when we actually met 25 sports people. So we were talking there about champions in the Romanian sports, different sports, but also coaches of future champions. And they contributed to it and they told us what's good, what's not so good. So we consulted to get the document in the way it is today. Now, can this document be ideal? this document can never be ideal, but let's see it as a work in progress. And let's see that if we like what we've done so far, how else can we adapt it to my sport in my club, in my federation, or in my country where I practice sport, or when I coach other children to practice sport. Now, what do we mean by safeguarding? I would like here to just refer to the definition of safeguarding, the way we see it at the ZOM and the way we promote it through this policy. Now, in sport, or safeguarding in sport, it means that all of us as sport people, we have a responsibility to promote that sport or the sports activities in the summer camp as safe and well-being. So all the children should be able to have access to it. They should enjoy those activities as fun activities, but also safe activities, irrespective of the children's involvement and engagement in the game or in that activity. We know, we've seen too many times, we've seen that some children, let's say my daughter, for example, last week, she prepared a presentation about reaffirming girls' rights. And she talked there about the fact that sometimes when a girl plays football, it's seen like, oh, you don't belong here. She's a child who is 12 years old. She's already heard about these sorts of experiences. However, things have changed, at least in the last 5 to 7 years, when UEFA said, no, we need football teams played by the girls. We need a lot of other things there. So we need to include rather than exclude others from taking part in the game. Now, when we look at this policy, what are the main parts? And let's just have a quick look at them together. We'll have a part which is about the introduction. We'll see what we know about that. And then we'll see how achievable or how applicable actually are these preventative measures. So that's the moment when we'll go through all of them. Please try and think, do I do that at my club, at my federation, at my summer camp? Do I do those measures? Can I implement them? What could be the barriers? And I would like us at the end probably to debate or to search support from one another to see how can I implement these sorts of preventative measures. And of course, the last one is what? The responsive measures. Usually these are in that moment when I've identified that the child has suffered abuse, neglect, maltreatment, ill treatment, I am concerned, I am worried, and then this document, the policy tells us how should I act from there. But we will see that this document, it is a general, a macro document. What do we mean by that? The way it is being written is for all of us to adapt it and to make it specific or fit for purpose within our context, within my sports club, within my federation, within the summer camp. So we'll see how we can adapt it there. Now, this document is not that we created it. So we did not want to say that, yes, we reinvented the wheel. We haven't done that at all. But what we've done in preparation of writing this document and implementing it at the ZOM, we have done a lot of reading of many, many tools. Some of them are keeping children safe in sports, international standards, for example. So we looked at a lot of good practice, IOC, International Olympic Committee. We looked at all of these documents, and those are the ones that we reflected about, and then we decided how is it going to look best like for our purpose, to keep children safe in sports and in recreational setting. Now, the final part of this document, it's about annexes. Now, the annexes are what? The procedures. That's why this document is the policy, and then the procedures, which tells me exactly step by step, what should I do to prevent anybody that could pose risk to children to ever enter the environment, or if I've identified them there, if they have done something to show risk to the children, what can I do to stop that as soon as humanly possible? So these are just the main areas of this document. And I'm just going to take them now one by one. Now, I've said just a few minutes ago that this is for us to adapt. That's why when we look at the purpose of this policy, what is the purpose? It places the utmost importance in saving and promoting the well-being of children in and around sport. Now, name of your organization. This is where we would like you to put your name there, the name of your club, the main name of your organization or setting, recreational setting, but then also to see what does it mean to you. For us, we would like all of us to own this document. This is not Terre des Hommes' document. For us, it's the template, it's what we created. For you, you're going to turn it your own once you put the name of your organization or club there, and then once you share it with your staff, once everybody from the club actually knows this. Now, what does this apply to all of us? Of course, it applies to all of us. It applies to me as, let's say, the CEO or the head of the club or the federation, but it also applies to the volunteers that might actually work with you. I remember as a social worker, I remember when I worked with a volunteer who posed risk to children, and I remember that what happened there, we've identified together with other professionals, we did something about it, and also we reported this person to the local authority as well. We've done very, very well when we reported this person. Why? After he left our club, for example, he's gone into another club and he offered to be a volunteer again. If we wouldn't have reported the concerns, probably the next club would have welcomed them, and then that adult would be in yet again another situation when they could do a lot of bad things actually to the children. Now, the child safeguarding policies has been developed as a sign of our commitment to ensure that all children which we come in contact are safeguarding and their well-being is promoted. So I would like us, when we think about this document, too often we are saying that we do it as a ticker box. Please go beyond ticker box, read the document yourself, and then try and see how applicable is it to me. I know Christina and Alina, they have worked so hard with groups of sports people, and now we have those groups, working groups, in which we're actually looking at how we apply it in Romania to gymnastics and football, in Greece how we apply it to the summer camps. So we have a lot of good pockets of very good practice in which we are making it even more fit for purpose. In the end, it will be that this policy will be adopted on different segments on sports or different settings in sport. Now, the next part of the policy is the scope of it. Now, too often what happens when we create policies is that we create a policy as a generic document. Now, this document that you have in front of us, it's not a generic one. And why do I say that? This document applies to everyone that is involved in sports or settings, or that could be involved in sports and settings. Now, this document is not just for those that work directly with children, not just for the coaches, not just for the ones on the football pitch, gymnastics, or recreational setting. It is all the way from the board members. So should you think that, yes, it's time for me to do something about it, to implement this policy, the next thing would be discuss with your senior managers. Tell them why we need it, exactly as I presented in the last few minutes, and then tell them, we need to do this. Let's see how we can do it together. They need to be involved in it straight away. Now, all the personnel, so everybody is there, employees, contractors, and consultants, they need to sign up to this policy. Now, also, let's think about volunteers as well. You might have parents who volunteer to help with certain activities. You might have parents who want to actually contribute by transporting children from one place to another. Make sure that they adhere to this one as well, because unfortunately in the past, we had volunteers who came with very, very devious intentions, which were translated into children being abused or neglected. Now, volunteers, we have them there as well. And then strategic partners, we know at Terre des Hommes, what we are proud to say we've done for many, many years. Whenever we start a project with somebody, we always, in the kickoff meeting, as we call it, we always talk about, let me tell you about my child safeguarding policy. Why? Because we want everybody that we work with to promote the rights for safety for all the children. And then the final one here, donors and supporters. Of course, you might have, as a football club, as a gymnastics club, or as a summer camp, or any other sports you might come from, we know that we practice sport, or we allow children to practice sport based on the donations that we have. Sometimes in the past, we had people doing that role as donator, as a kind of position of trust. And some of them in the past, unfortunately, abused children. That's something that this policy will stop or will prevent from actually happening. Now, in terms of terminology, this policy also put together key definitions, for example. What do we mean by that? What is safeguarding? What is a child? What is child abuse? What is harm? Or sometimes you might refer to it as significant harm. What is violence? What is bullying? What is cyberbullying? So this would be very, very useful to all of us. Like what? Like a document that brings together a lot of terminology. So if you want to read more about these key definitions, you don't have to go and search, let's say, on 3 different websites. Yeah. But what you can do is get this document, and it will give you the definition of the most important, or the, let's say, the key aspects of safeguarding. Now, underpinning principles, what do we mean by that? So first of all is participation in sport. How do we make it safe? Then after that, all the actions that we do, how do we do the actions? How do we know that they're impactful? The measures, how do we make sure that we act in a very non-discriminatory way? So we accept, and also we include our children to play football rather than actually sending some away, because some children might have a disability. Some other children might not be as fast as other children during a sports activity. Transparency and openness, how do we do that? How do we also make sure that we take all the concerns seriously And how do we make sure that when we respond to any concerns, we do it as a joint effort? Now, what we have learned in this field called child safeguarding, we've learned that if we work in isolation, so if it's just me as an island, if I don't work together with the others, that's not going to keep children safe, but that will actually allow children to be in an unsafe situation, to remain vulnerable, and some of them have been abused, unfortunately, when that has happened. That's why we need to understand that our role is to do something together. Now, I would like to invite you, for example, if you want to know more about your local legislation. I know in Romania, we do have, for example, legislation 272 from 2004. We have some other additional document. This policy works hand in hand with the local legislation as well. So please, as a more reflective point for us there, have a look into those as well. Now, specific area of concerns, and this is to complement all those key definitions and principles that I've just mentioned. What do we mean by those? Safety of facilities and equipment. I remember in the first training we did in Bucharest in August last year, I remember that I had a discussion with one of our colleagues from gymnastics, lovely trainer on gymnastics, and he trains children, and he said this: every single time before a training session, before a competition, what is my role? My role is to check that all the facilities are fit for purpose and there are no risks at all. And for me, I was interested, how do you do that? And he said he was the one doing the hard job to going under the, for example, the platform for gymnastics. He was doing that. He was checking everything himself and with his colleagues. The safety of activities. When we do any activities, how do we make sure that they are safe? How do we make sure that there are no hazards at all? How do we make sure that safety is that activity in line with the child development, for example? Am I asking a child who is 5 years old to do 1,000 push-ups? We shouldn't do that. We should ask them to do as per their age and as per their development. Now, supervision of children. I remember one day I was at Luton Airport to fly somewhere else in Europe. I remember just by the place where I was sitting, I could see it was a sports club. I don't know exactly what sport was it, but I remember there were 2 adults there with about 16, 17 children, and the children were about 10, 11, 12, 13, something like that. And I remember how they put the teachers, before they let children go to explore a little bit, they put some very, very good ground rules. And the ground rules were like this: you only go in groups of 3, you're always together, and you don't leave somebody behind. You have 15 minutes to walk there, and then we'll come back in this spot in 15 minutes. And obviously, we'll see whether we can do this again. But they were doing it in a very, very safety way. And they made sure that one of the coaches stayed in that place. So if a child needed any help or support, they were there to provide that. Now, close relationships. We know for us in this call who are sports people, we know that children look up to us. They look up to you as a coach, as a teacher. Why? Because they want to be like you. They want to excel at that sport that you are training them on. And that leads into a close relationship. Unfortunately, we've seen that some of us, like Barry Bonnell and Andrew Woodward, Barry Bonnell took advantage of that close relationship, and he sexually abused Andrew. Now, physical injuries and medical treatment. How do we know that sports people, that a physical injury can be, let's say, can aggravate, can be worse for the child? Sometimes we know children, and we link that also with pressure to perform. Children want to excel. They want to do their best. They want to become, I don't know, the next Messi, the next think about other worldwide famous players, or Nadia Comaneci in gymnastics, for example. So they want to do that. But then it might be that sometimes your role or our role is to say, hold on a minute, child, the risk is not worth it. If you do that, you might get a permanent injury, and then you'll have to quit sports forever. And then physical care. Physical care refers to, and I'm thinking now about probably something that we've seen on Netflix, all of us, Dr. Larry Nassar from USA. He was the doctor of the gymnastics team, and he sexually abused a high number of girls when he was pretending to actually help them with any medical needs that they had. And then bullying, I would like to link this with cyberbullying as well. So we have seen a lot of this happening, and even at this moment, we know how we would like to respond to it, but we have a lot of children who are actually experiencing these sorts of harm through sport and in sport and around sport. Now, next thing on our agenda is to look at the preventative measures. And what I would like us to do here, let's think about it like we are building a house. Yeah. So when we build this house, and I know my colleague Alina from Terre des Hommes, she speaks so beautifully about the house of resilience. So how we can make the children to be more resilient, to achieve through sport. So what do we mean by that? Just like in a house, the first thing that we put together is the basement, isn't it? So we just lay the basement, and if that is very, very solid, that means that our house probably will last for generations. If it's not solid at all, if we build it on sand, when the first wave comes, we know that the whole house actually disappears or is destroyed. Now, this is what we mean by preventative measures. The first thing that we should all consider or all do is to adopt a safeguarding policy. Now, I know in this webinar, we talk about ours, the Terre des Hommes. There are many, many other available. For us, we are promoting us because we worked on it, because we know it's good, and because, as I said, we combine theoretical frameworks with practitioners, with practice, and that's why I feel that ours is fit for purpose, and you can still adapt it to your environment. But unless we adopt one, it might be that the next levels up, they become redundant. It might be that they are not as strong as we would like them to be. Now, what's next? Roles and responsibilities. So these policies will describe the roles and responsibilities. How can I do? How can I keep children safe as a let's say as a tutor in the summer camp, as a coach in a football club, in a gymnastics club, as somebody, as a volunteer? We need to have those very, very well established. Now, the next thing, the code of conduct. I know more and more we introduce the codes of conduct. Why? Not because we tick a box, but because we want everybody to understand what is right, what is not right. We know, I mentioned earlier about this concept, bullying. Sometimes we refer to it as sexting. We've seen too many children self-harming, too many children experiencing mental health difficulties, some children also ending their lives. I'm talking about teenagers here. Why? Because probably we were not thorough with the code of conduct of how to use our mobile devices. What about if you're doing a training session, and you notice that there is a stranger on the side of the pitch or the field, and they are taking videos or photos? That's not supposed to happen. We need to tackle it. We need to address it. That's why the code of conduct could be very, very useful there. The other thing, safer recruitment. How do we know? How can we say hand on heart that whenever you recruit someone, they are not a person that could abuse or neglect children? I would like to refer here to a study which was done in, I think it was Denmark, some good years ago. And when they talked about recruiting new coaches for clubs, and it was different sports clubs, they said that when they recruited a new coach, if they knew about that coach from somebody else, they were only doing checks in up to 5% of the cases, in a very, very, no, if they knew what 5%, no, if they knew it 2%, but were doing checks. If they didn't know them, they were checking up to 5%. So that is a gap in our safeguarding practice straight away, because it might be, how do you know that that person that you're just recruiting or accepting as a volunteer has not done somebody at the previous club? You don't know unless we check it. So that's why, as part of the step-by-step approach to safe recruitment, that could be one of the steps there. Now, awareness and training. We know this webinar, what are we doing? Practically, it is a preventative measure when we raise awareness about a good tool called the Child Safeguarding Policy. And we are advising you, we are guiding you, we are inviting you to read it and then to implement it and to put it in practice. But if you are just talking about things and not do the things, sometimes you might just do talk. If you don't manage to link the talk with the walk, so I'm up to and I'm doing something, it might be that we will still not keep children safe. Now, disciplinary process for non-compliance, let's consider that. Do we have one? How do we make sure that we stop or we apply this disciplinary process if somebody does the things that they are not supposed to do? I remember, for example, it was a case that happened in Romania back in October 2020, when we've identified that a trainer, he was a coach in volleyball, and he was actually engaged in discussions with teenage girls from part of his team, and he was making a lot of comments about, oh, look at your body, look at how beautiful your body developed as because you've done sport, because you came and did sport in my team. And when the same coach, what did they do? They asked the girls to send in pictures. Initially, it was pictures in the sports costume, and after that, pictures of certain parts of the body, the bum or the breast, for example. And then he started to actually blackmail the girls to do some things, to touch themselves online, for example, when he was looking, or to send him videos of them touching themselves. So in this moment, our disciplinary process should be so clear. So we make sure that what we do, that person will never ever have contact with children if he did something like that, because that is a form of abuse, it's sexual abuse. Now, supervision of children, I mentioned the example a little bit earlier. How do we make sure that all children are supervised at all time. And we know more and more we have guidelines. UEFA, for example, in football, they do speak on specific ages. What is the rate? What is the rate? 1 for 6, 1 for 10, 1 for 8. So some bodies, international bodies, already give us some of the options there and some of the guidelines. Now, risk assessments, what do we mean by it? First of all, it could be the risk assessment as a club. We all need to have a risk assessment. Later, we'll see in one of the annexes, it is called a self-assessment. So just a kind of the snapshot, what do we do about safeguarding and how effective actually our responses are? And if we see that we don't do something, what can I do about it? So that's a very good template that I would like you to consider, and I'll show it to you in the next few moments. Risk assessment also means it's also linked into activities. So when you plan to do a trip, for example, with some children, do I have a risk assessment? And what does that tell me? Is it okay that I just go as a one adult with 20 children? So that's probably, we need to reconsider that, because probably is not the safest thing that we can do. What about when we go there, two of us, and I'm mindful that my colleague actually brought a lot of alcohol, so they can drink that alcohol in the night when the children are in bed. Again, another risk that we need to reflect about and to see what can I do? Is it safe or is it not safe there? And the third risk assessment that we have in this policy, the third template, is with regard to making or alerting child protection agencies when an incident has happened. So when I've seen that, let's say somebody, one coach, asked all the girls to do 10 rounds of the pitch in their underwear. That should not happen. Even if it's the hottest day on earth, why should we do that? We shouldn't. That's exposing the girls. And some of the girls in the past have done this. They did what the coach actually asked them. Why? Because they did not want to disappoint the coach. But what's the reason in doing it? I can only think about possibility of grooming towards another form of abuse. So these are the preventative measures. Now, what we will also notice when we look at implementing the child safeguarding policy is that our understanding evolves from one year to another. I'm always thinking back now about when I've graduated social work back in 2001. I knew about physical abuse, sexual abuse, emotional abuse, neglect, and domestic violence. Those were the 5 ones. In the current time, in 2021, we have more than 20 other areas. I mentioned, for example, bullying on cyberbullying, but no further than other things, working with children who are of migrant families, working with children who are transgender, working with children who are gay. All of those things, they could lead to a lot of abuse unless we know how to recognize, unless we know how to respond to those. Now, with this one, let's move into the responsive measures. And what do we mean by responsive measures? First of all, is we respond to any safeguarding incidents or any concerns. Now, where do we start with that? Because we know child safeguarding, and especially us responding to child safeguarding, it's not a fixed science. It's not like somebody scored a goal, let's go into the middle of the pitch and restart the game. It's not like that at all. But what is it? Whenever any of us could be or are concerned, we need to know that we've got somebody there that we can talk to. That's why our policy says clearly that for all of the clubs, for all the federations, the summer camps, recreational settings, it would be great, and we encourage for us to identify one person, at least one, that actually take the responsibility of, sometimes we call it a focal point, child safeguarding focal point, or the child safeguarding champion. So it's important for us to have that person. In some countries, there is a requirement. In the UK, it is a requirement that we all have at least 1, 2, or 3, and we call them designated safeguarding leads. So that happens here. In other countries, we are at the beginning of actually starting to think like that. Now, those people who are appointed with these responsibilities, they are the ones that should coordinate everything that happens on safeguarding. They are the ones that should be actually talking about how often we update our policies and what do we do in case anything happens. Now, after that, given that we know how to recognize, obviously we need to report the incidents. How do we report it? Looking at the local child protection system, looking at, Department for Child Protection that we have in Romania. In England, we have what is called the multi-agency safeguarding teams. So it's all about identifying where can I go and sometimes report cases, but also seek help and advice. Now, the whistleblowing policy protection clause, we know sometimes I've seen in the practice that the whistleblower policy is misinterpreted. Why? Sometimes when somebody uses the whistleblower policy, they might be told off. We are not supposed to be told off for whistleblowing. What is whistleblowing? It might be that any of us identify any gap or failure within our practice to keep children safe. And by starting the whistleblowing clause, what do? We alert all the others about this gap, And then all of us, we contribute, we do something to address these issues. That's why if any of us raise concerns, for example, about a child being abused, that cannot lead to our dismissal. It cannot lead to that, or it shouldn't lead to that at all. At least in the UK, I can say that definitely that doesn't happen. Now, how it happens locally, that's something that obviously we need to explore, all of us in the countries where we are. And then as a final thing for responsive measure, we know that, and we can see how we can link here the prevention with the responsive measures. The first thing that I would like all of us to do is to make sure that we adopt the policy. We adopt the policy, meaning that we all know about it. It is promoted. We talk to everybody in my club setting or federation. We talked about it. And also we are aware that it is there. And then if in addition to that, we can also have somebody who takes responsibility for this policy, that would be even better, because that person becomes there the person that coordinates and the person that can give advice, the person that could be the point of contact. Now, in terms of monitoring and evaluation, we also need to monitor to see, are we achieving what we said we want to do by implementing this? And what do we want to achieve? We want the safety, the well-being of the children in, around sport, and through sport. So these were the preventative actions and the responsive actions, and you will find them in more details in the child protection policy. So please pay some attention to that. Now, I know some of us might say, but Paul, I don't have the time. It's a lot to read. It's not a lot to read. We try and put it as concise as possible and to be useful to us in practice. Yeah. So that's why please take a look and see whether whether we find it useful. Now, after the policy, of course, we thought about all those annexes. Now, why are these annexes useful to us, or the tools? We might call it the tools as well. Because rather than you having to reinvent the wheel, rather than you having to create something, it might be that you can see these tools and you just want to adapt it to make sense to you or to be fit for purpose for your setting. First of all, annex number 1 is recognizing child abuse. Now, what we did successfully with this one is we looked at a lot of literature with regard to what are the signs of abuse, but not just in general terms, in the sports clubs, in settings as well, recreational settings. So we put it together to make sense, to be relevant to us. Yeah. Now this one, it might be, and I can say hand on heart, that probably in 5 years from now, we'll definitely have to review it, and we'll definitely have to update it, because we'll understand a little bit more what abuse actually means. What do I mean by that? 10 years ago, did we talk about sexting? Somebody taking a picture of somebody naked and posting it online? No, we didn't. Now we know that's one of the key new areas under child safeguarding. Now, the other annex, we have the specific risk assessment. I mentioned earlier how it can be a club risk assessment, it could be an event risk assessment, it could be an incident risk assessment. So again, you have the templates there. Now, do you need to complete everything in these templates when you identify or do a risk assessment? Complete as much as you can, because it's going to give you a holistic assessment whether I should be concerned or not. Now, privacy and safe use of changing facilities. Why did we talk about this? Why do we have it here as the guidance? Because we've seen incidents when, for example, a very angry coach at the end of a match, they went into the, let's say it was a girls' team, and they were male, and they went into the changing room. It shouldn't happen like that. It doesn't matter that I'm so angry and worried that I lost the match. I should not go. I should not invade the privacy. Some people, unfortunately, have done it. So through these sorts of guidances, we try to cover as much as possible many aspects, and to see how can we do it safely. The other one, number 4, roles and responsibilities of the child safeguarding focal point. So this, and you'll see, this is not a lot. So we shouldn't imagine it like reams and rhymes and many pages. It's not like that at all. It's on half, I think it's more than half a page there, but you just give us bullet points with regard to what are those roles and responsibilities. Now, ideally it would be that practically whoever takes these responsibilities, these are included in their job description. Now, I'm aware that nobody has money for this, or nobody wants to do this. Some people would like to do it because they are aspirational and they want to do the right thing to keep children safe. Encourage them to do it. But your role is to look through them and see whether they make sense to you and how they can be adapted. Now, number 5 is the code of conduct, or it should be the plural, the codes of conduct. Why? Usually when we look at the stakeholders in a sports activity, who are they? The children that play the football. So we thought about one code of conduct for them, the parents of these children, and then also the staff or the volunteers. So you'll see there three codes of conduct, so it could be very useful. Now, the next one, safer recruitment. I've already mentioned about this a little bit earlier. So it's all about those steps. It just describes those steps, the checks that we need to do. So it's all the way from the first time when I might contact your club to want to work for you, all the way until I leave the club. So it highlights the journey there and what you can do to make sure that there is no risks involved there at all. Now, the consent form, it's a very, very good one as well. How often do we get the consent? We remember what Christina said at the beginning of this webinar. She said about the GDPR, isn't it? And recording the webinar. Yes, we do that. But also, in terms of your consent when children go and do any activities, how do you do it? What's the dialogue there? This could be some good reflection activity and also some forms for you to consider how to actually achieve that. Medical forms, we know, unfortunately, accidents do happen. Some children get injuries, but then how do we complete that medical form? Do we have it, or the ones that we have it, is it fit for purpose? I would like to invite you to probably compare and contrast the one that you use now with the one that you put in there. If you feel that yours is better, why not? Let us know. Contact Christina, let her know, so we can still update, or we can put yours as a kind of best practice, the template there as well. Now, the other things, guidelines for supervision and activities and trips, including overnight stays. Andrew Woodward, for example, just to come back to him for a few moments, when they were away, on away matches, in the evening, Barry Bonnell was inviting Andy to come to his room in the evening, saying that he wants to discuss with him about the next match game strategy. But in fact, it was just a motive to get him there. And after that, he was raping him. And that happened on more than 500 occasions. So these guidelines could help us to reflect, to see, have I thought about all the aspects? Is there anything else I need to reflect about? Or how do I put all the safety things in place? Now, online protection and safety. We know currently, us as grown-ups, even this webinar, it happens online. Our children have smart devices. They are so connected these days. How do you know that everybody's safe when they go online? There are so many things. I remember reading, for example, or some of the news that I heard in January, this was actually, probably you've heard about the site called Omegle. So we've heard that in England, at least, we heard that there are many, many children, many boys of a very, very young age who actually touch themselves in front of the cameras when grown adults are watching from the other side. So there are many, many concerns there. Now, even with our online protection and safety guidelines there, does that cover it all? I would say is the start of our attempts to understand what happens and how to put the safety measures in place. Because even if you are the most comprehensive answer to this question, you might still find that actually it doesn't cover it all. Now, responding to a child safeguarding incidents and concern. I mentioned about this earlier. The first thing would be the stakeholders that you need to be aware of. Do you know, for example, let's say I'm in England, Lincolnshire. Do I know where is the child protection agencies? Do I know how to contact them? There should be. They are well established. They exist. Or if they don't exist, try and find out who can you contact. If they don't exist at all, it might be in some countries, then we need to go via the police or through the police. General child safeguarding risk assessment template. So this is practically the one that I mentioned earlier about the event. It will give you some heads up with regard to what should I consider when a child is at risk. The next one is about self-evaluation. Now, this is the one that was done based on the International Child Safeguarding in Sports. And this one, if you want, usually this is recommended to senior managers, or let's say owners or managers of the clubs or sports setting. So when they go through every single part of it, it will take probably, I would say, a good half an hour or 45 minutes to complete this. But when you go through all of this, you'll see that you'll find out, it's going to give you a snapshot. What are you good at doing when you keep children safe through sport? And what else do you think you need to do? Now, for this one, I would like to invite you, if you feel that there are difficulties to complete or you don't know how to complete, at Cerdezom, we've done many of this. We've done this in any country, every country where we exist. So that's why get in touch with Christina or with Maria from Greece and see how they can guide you further from there. Now, action plan and progress form. This goes hand in hand with Annex 13. So what will I do? What can I do next? How can I be better at keeping children safe? And then the final one, again, the Children's Code of Conduct. So I mentioned in Annex 5, Code of Conduct for parents, Code of Conduct for professionals, and this one, 15, is Code of Conduct for the children. Now, do we need something like this? I think it's a high priority. Why? Just think about, let's say, that thing called sexting. We know probably when children come there to do sport, they come to do sport, not to have, like sometimes I described in my work with children, the child had the mobile phone as an extent of their right arm. No, they are there to do sport, not to be socializing, not to be on the social media, unless there is an urgent thing that they need to share with their parents. So I know that I've shared a lot of information for the last, I think it's almost 1 hour now. And what I would like to remind ourselves just about this. So we know Terre des Hommes has been with us for many, many years. We know that, as I mentioned in previously, Terre des Hommes in 2018 became the only partner of UEFA, for example, with regard to child protection. In Romania, Terre des Hommes has worked on building partnership with Ministry of Education, with the Federation of Gymnastics, Federation of Football. So we have partnerships there. We also have the regional office, which is in Budapest, who is also part of this project. So we could see how it all started. In 2019, for example, we did a study group scheme in Frankfurt when we had most of the national football associations there. Yeah, since then, all the partnerships that we've seen with the gymnastics, they happen as well. In 2020, we've done the TOT, training of trainers in Bucharest, but also in Greece. Also, we've started with the webinars. Now in 2021, we can see how now we are ready to act. And that's why in 2022, because this project, I know it ends in a few months, isn't it? 3 months, we end this project, but I would like us to take this further. I would like all of us to take this into 2022, 2023, for how many times you want, how many years you want to. But for me, the question is, are you up to, and will you go for it? Because I think it's very important to do something and to go for it. And to take us back to something that we said a little bit earlier, what do we mean by go for it? The first thing is implementing the child protection or child safeguarding policy. Let's all do that, and we'll see the one that once we do it, and it's not going to be easy. There will be barriers. Some people will be saying it doesn't apply to me. Actually tell them it does apply to us. As long as we work with children in sport context, it applies to all of us, because we've seen too many cases when children suffered in, around, and through sport. So that's why we need to sign up and to have this commitment to do something about it. And with that in mind, I'm just going to go to the final part of this course. So it's about questions, answers, and we'll say thank you in the next few moments. What I would like us to do, please, if you had any questions, I didn't keep an eye on the chat. Probably Alina and Christina, you've done that. Let's think about any questions. And I know we cannot do a chat in terms of the live chat because it's a webinar. But if you just try to put your questions there, and then what I'll be doing, I'll be going through the questions so we can answer them as much as we can. So I'm just going to open the chat to see what we have any messages. Any questions? Was it useful? Was it not? What would you like to know more? Or what could be the challenges when we actually want to implement this child safeguarding policy at our club or federation or sports setting? Or if you want to add anything, Alina or Christina, please unmute and yeah. Or shall we have a dialogue? Shall we invite people to unmute, Christina? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think we can unmute ourselves, right?
Yep, absolutely. You can just unmute. So if anyone has a question or want to do any reflection, please unmute and let's speak up. Let's have a voice.
Yeah, great presentation. What I'm curious about is you've defined a wonderful policy. And the big struggle we see, for example, in the Netherlands is then how to get it to the grassroots level. How do we make sure that people, of course, feel very responsible for keeping children safe and have all these rules and regulations that can be implemented, but often they are volunteers and they feel like this is another thing we have to do besides saying organizing trainings or so could you tell maybe a little bit more what in your view could be mechanisms to really get it implemented at the grassroots level? Because I think in professional settings, there's more pressure and professional approaches, but how do we get it in these recreational grassroots settings? That's a little bit where I'm curious about.
Very good question. Thank you very much, Vidar. Now I'm just going to put, have a dual approach here. So the first approach is we are in this call. We are 17 people talking about this very, very important and interesting topic. And what I would like us, let's think about us being the drivers for change. Why? Let's put it this way. Can I go to my government in my country tomorrow to tell them we need this policy to be adopted by the Ministry of Education and Sport and Health? I cannot do that unless you are in a very senior position. Yeah, so we cannot do that. But what can I do? Can I move this pencil from here over here? I can do that. Now, this is what I would like us to do with regard to if all of us in here, based on our sports contact, based on our roles in sport, if we start talking about this, even if at this moment we don't have the national legislation in line with everything, I think we have the right framework to start talking. What do I say by that? Now, in Romania and in Greece, at least, the countries where this project is happening right now, so we know that in Romania, Christina has worked hard to involve the National Agency for Child Protection, Ministry of Sport, all the other forums. So Christina's worked hard to involve them. We have a legislation 272 from 2004 that says this. All of us who are in contact directly with children or indirectly, we have a role in protecting children. So that's the legislation base that tells me that I can do something. For me, I would like to, or what do we do through this webinar and through this project? We create a momentum. And that's why it's up to us how we take it further. Now, if let's say, what could be the worst that can happen? So I'm going to implement this. I'm going to talk to, let's say I'm running a club of, bowling, yeah? I'm running that club. We have children coming there. So I talk there with the members of staff in my team about it. And then we tell them why it's important to have it. So straight away, I raise awareness and I'm telling them, guys, we need to sign up to this because we want to make sure that all children are safe. Now, are there any pitfalls? Can anything go bad? No, some people might say, yes, but it's too many things for me to do. Okay, let me take the role of the focal point. Let me do it and come to me. If you are worried about the child safety, come to me. Now, something that could happen, what we've seen especially in England. In England in 1987, we created what is called the child line. So child line is a phone line for the children to call and speak about being abused or others experiencing abuse. So it's very, very dedicated line there. Now, since we created that, we've seen that the number has increased year by year. Why? Because children actually have a voice and tell us about it. When some people might say it doesn't happen in my club, we are not saying that it has to happen. What we are saying is let's do the preventive, the prophylactic way. Let's all be equipped with it. So in case it happened, I know how to respond to that. Now, why are you very important in doing this? And I'm looking here at, I think, Ionica, te salut. Hi, Ionica, I can see you from there. So I remember having discussions. Hello. Ionica is into gymnastics and he's a wonderful sports person. He does a lot of sports activities himself. He's very engaged, very involved. So I remember having discussions with him when we talked about the importance of you as a sport person knowing even what is an injury. Because for me, as a parent, I do know as a parent what an injury is. For you as a sports person, you know it on the floor, you know it there with the children. And that's why by you talking, raising the awareness, knowing those specific things, you can identify, should we do or should we do more or less in that aspect? So that's why for me, it would be from bottom to the top. Now, us doing it like this, I mentioned about Terre des Hommes partnership with UEFA. So practically Terre des Hommes does it from here, from top to the bottom. Yeah. So we will meet somewhere in the middle. Now, am I talking here about a journey that will be finishing when this project finishes? I hope not. That's why what I mentioned about England. This is a journey that started more than 20 years ago, and we are still not there yet. So it's step by step by step. Now, the people that will be saying, people could be in denial. That's fine. We don't have to argue about it. We don't have to have arguments about it. The message to send clear is, okay, we have this policy now. Let's all sign up to it. And in case it happens, we know what we have to do and come and talk to me. So that's the best approach that I could suggest there, but it will come with challenges. It's not going to be an easy journey. One thing that I can say proudly we've achieved in the training courses that we've done last year in Greece and in Romania, we had people there that came with a skeptical view. They said, does this apply to me? I don't know how this applies to me. When people left that training, they said this, whoa, now I know. Now I know that I shouldn't say as a sport coach, you must do this child. Practically, let's talk to the child to see, can they do these things? Can I push them? So we are changing the mindset gradually. And that's why we are all very important here and now. I hope I answered your question. There is no easy way to answer this question. There is no, let's say, magic wand. We don't have it, but we can be the magic wand that can start changing the things gradually there. Thank you for the question. I'm just having a quick look at the chat here. I'm trying to read anything in the same time. So Ifaki said, if there are two important challenges, how to translate the protection language from protection experts to sport practitioners. It's a very, very good point. And this is, I would like to take us back to what I said earlier. So when we think about the safety of the activity, now in the policy, we gave you a kind of general view. your role is and your challenge is to take that into your sport. Now, let's say if we compare, let's compare gymnastics with football, yeah, or with so it's a team sport and an individual sport to some extent. So I mentioned earlier how our colleague from gymnastics, he said this: whenever I start the training, I check all the equipment. Now, let's think about the football as well. What do we do before football? There is a discussion with the team player, there is a lot of, let's say, psychological training taking place as well. It's for you to be able to see how you translate it and adapt it. And that's why my encouragement would be this: when you've adapted any part of this policy, why not send it to Christina, send it to us as well, so we can keep an eye and we can have a kind of database through the Child Hub, which is a very good platform for all of us in Southeast Europe, for example. And on that platform, we can say, this is a good practice. So when others are in the same sport as you do, and you've adopted that, why not share it so we can spread the word with the others as well? And hopefully we can do a webinar when we'll talk exactly about this good practice example. So we can do that one very, very well. But it's going to be your role, because let's put it this way. If, for example, we have, let's say, gymnastics again. So we speak with some gymnasts and we adapt it to gymnastics. Even then, if you look at how gymnastics progressed from a decade to another, the specifics of the sports have changed. So even if right now we are saying this is a tool which is fit for purpose, in 10 years time, we might need to look at it and say, actually, we've learned something else about child safeguarding, and we need to do a little bit more there. And then the second one, how to combine the legal obligation coming from the law and the ethical responsibility every person in the club have to have. Now, this is, again, is changing the mentality. Yeah, is the mindset that we're having. The way I'm seeing this, it's going to be in a very simplistic way. Now, if you talk to your staff and your volunteers about the child safeguarding policy, straight away you raise awareness, straight away you affect the change in them, and you might be able to address some of the difficult questions there. And it's not so much to say, we all have to do this. It's not like that at all. It's we need to be equipped in case it happens to respond. So rather than being paranoid about it, we are being prepared in case it happens there. Now, again, with regard to legislation, I can tell you, I know legislation in Romania. I know it in Greece. I know it in England as well. Wales, Northern Ireland, the places where I've been and where I practice. But in terms of your countries, have a look at that legislation and see, as long as it says that you have a responsibility to protect children, whatever the environment, that is the baseline for you. And usually if I were you, when I would start a discussion with my club, I would say this: actually, this is the legislation. Paul, tell me, how do you fulfill that obligation? I don't know. And let's have a look at this policy. This policy might be an eye-opener, how I can actually respond to that. Again, not an easy question, not an easy answer to give. It's all about how we move things forward. What I would encourage all of us to do, Terdezom has done a lot of hard work on this, but also on the other project. Terdezom can still be consulted, and I'm sorry, I'm speaking before talking to Christina and Alina, but you have provided so much consultation to professionals or to teams, organizations about these sorts of topics. It could be, this dialogue, in my view, could remain an open dialogue. Any other questions? Thank you for the questions. Very reflective and very practical and specific. Nope. Alina, Christina, anything from your side?
Not from me.
Nope. Can I just say,
Maria, from you?
Where is my, hello, Maria.
Maria entered as well.
Hello,
everyone. Hi.
Hey.
I can recognize the armchair, Maria.
Sorry?
I can recognize your armchair. I've seen it before in other webinars.
I wasn't ready to open my camera, but still. Thank you, Paul, for all the review of the policy. I also heard the very interesting questions and the interesting answers you gave. I would also like very quickly to add my perspective on that, mainly as regards Vidar Stevens' question. How do we reach the grassroots level? So what I realized from my experience in this project is that what you say, that safeguarding is a teamwork, is really true. And it has to do with teamwork on all levels. So the experience in Greece it's quite different to the one in Romania. So here we don't have the buy-in from the association. So we didn't start working from the bottom up, but we started working, we didn't work top down, but we started working from the bottom. And this has been a very successful experience. And we see the high interest of all people that work with children. So we have reached to a stage that we started working with individuals that work with children, with professionals supporting them. And after some months of work, we reached the stage that the Ministry of Social Affairs and Labor called TDH to see, hey, what are you doing there? We are interested in changing the legislation and we would like to work with you. So I don't think there is one example. There is not one way. It has to do with with the circumstances on different contexts, etc. But as long as there is the commitment, then, as you say, Paul, we create the momentum, and then we can all protect children through our collaboration.
Also, based on what you've just said, Maria, I'm just curious for the rest of us as well to hear just one more aspect from you. So when you said that you started from the bottom to the top, and I know I was involved in the final, in the training there as well, how long was the journey between when we started the talk at this level with the summer camps and with the other partners? How long was between that work and then the government actually saying, oh, Terdezom, we would like you to be our partners? Are we talking about months or years?
We're talking about months in our
Months.
case, Paul, and this has to do with the professionals we work with. And I can see that a representative of the summer camps is here. Hi, Yorgos. So I do think that this revolution has to do with the commitment of the professionals. We didn't do this alone. And also in Greece, we have another example, the publicity of the Me Too campaign. We have had a lot of disclosures about sexual abuse in sports. So this actually was evident to the fact that these things happen and we need to protect ourselves and our companies or agencies from seeing that happening in our context. So it didn't take a lot, it takes a few months, but I don't think it's a typical example. I think things in Greece evolve very quickly, and this has to do with many factors.
Many factors, and the fact that Terdezom has been consistently present there with a lot of innovative work, isn't it? Because you took the lead into introducing child safeguarding policies in the summer camps, and that helped a lot. That idea and also the consistency of actually doing that. Perfect. Thank you very much, Maria. Any other thoughts or questions? Okay. Now, the next steps, I told you about that up to and go for it. So please consider it and see what it means to you. But also, if you feel that, or if you love this type of webinars, this type of presentation, then questions at the end, why not spend 2 minutes in the chat box and write us there probably a kind of few things, 3 things, for example. What did you like about this webinar today? So we can get a bit of feedback from you. And then, is there anything that you didn't like, anything that you felt, no, that's not useful? And then also as a first suggestion, please write there, what would be the topics or the themes that you would like us to address or to touch in the next webinar? Because what I would like, as I said, and Maria has seen it so well there, and I'm sure we've all seen it, is to create the momentum. Yeah, we are the momentum. Today we are 17. Next time we might be 30 to get to talk and to debate. But also out of us 17, if we start implementing the policy, of course, next time we're going to have a more debate about these sorts of things. It's working, it's not working. What can I do? Where do I go next? So can I just say a big thank you for listening today. I hope it's been helpful and meaningful. And for me, I'm looking forward to more events like this and to see how we can grow this momentum bigger and bigger and bigger. So thank you for listening and for the questions. Alina, Christina, over to you.
Thank you very much, Paul, and thank you everybody. And please include in the chat, what do you believe? What could be something that you liked and learned and something that you would like different and so on. Feedback is quite important and is done now in the chat. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you and best of luck and stay safe wherever you are.
Yes.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you, Maria. See you
Listen,
soon.
if you just want to stay a little bit longer in this, just to take the feedback and
Yes,
yeah,
sure.
next time.
Yeah.
Perfect. I'll speak to you a little bit later.
Thank you very
all.
much, Paul. Have a
Bye,
good
bye.
weekend. Bye.
Oh, yeah.
Astea spatele tale, Ioan?
Da, dar nu știu dacă pot să le pun pe ecran, că se înregistrează.
Can we have certificates of attendance?